Hi everyone. Thanks for coming. How about learning a little Catholicism? Isn't that pretty amazing?
Yeah, all right.
Well, all right. Well, first off, thank you all again for coming, and thank you for GVSHP for extending the invite for me to do this, and for touching on Don Powell's life and a wonderful op-ed piece they did a year ago was sort of the impetus for me to expand on this. Letting her tell the story from the form of her diary entries and excerpts from letters and a few of her novels, because what better way to have her story be told than from her primary source. So, and also, it's kind of an excuse for me not to talk that much, but I'll still be talking. But also, before I begin, I really should note that Tim Page's biography on Powell is a great source to go back to, as well as an excellent read. So I highly suggest taking a look at it. At the end of this, if you're interested in more about her life story and her background, because it's a lot of compelling stuff in there. So, but this being Greenwich Village, I'm going to focus on that. But before that, I sort of want to go a little bit into her background in Ohio. So, she was born on November 28th, 1896 at 53 West North Street, to Elroy and Hattie Sherman Powell, and was the second of three daughters, which include Mabel and Phyllis, who are pictured there. Dawn is on the far right. From the beginning, she showed remarkable talents, including an astounding memory and reading quite well before the age of 5, and by 9 years old, she made her way through the complete works of Alexander Dumas, so that sounds like genius material to me. Still, when she was really young, she would create elaborate stories to entertain her sister Phyllis, who she often babysat, and also impromptu plays for friends and relatives. But that whole carefree lifestyle sort of was thrown into turmoil when her mother passed away on December 6th, 1903. And because her father, who was in a sales position, most of his working career had this nomadic lifestyle, this traveling state to state, he sort of threw them into care babysitters or guardians for the next few years. They would return to a more stable and traditional family life when their father remarried to a woman, Sarah Stearns. And saying traditional and normal sort of a stretch here, maybe on the outside it seemed that way, but she was, again, in Tim Page's biography, he describes Stearns as the classic wicked stepmother with her resisting, pinched, mean face. And we all met people like that at some point in our life. And she often executed discipline so stern it made already the hard discipline of that era just seemed very soft. So it's, give you an idea of that. Some of the petty humiliation the children were subjected to included not being allowed to enter the front door. Of course, right? Can't enter the front door. Sit in the living room, play the piano, or touch any of the books that were kept locked up, which I'm sure that really just drove Dawn crazy. In one of her 1941 diary entries, she said, this is a quote, "Stepmother's greatest joy was making us go downtown on errands with no hems in our ragged calico skirts, so our schoolmates would sneer. Another sadistic treat was to make us come onto the porch to run wringer and washboard in worn-out Sunday dress in full view of the children playing so they can mock us." So as years went on, one of the two final straws that prompted Powell to run away, she eventually did, was when Sarah discovered some story drafts and drawings she was working on in a hidden notebook and then ended up burning them. So to add insult to injury, Dawn also found out that she wouldn't be able to attend high school since the family just recently moved and they couldn't afford the tuition for her as an out-of-town student. So, made up her mind, she decided to flee Ohio, well not Ohio, but her town in Ohio, and this is a quote from her autobiographical piece. It's, the name of that piece is "What Are You Doing in My Dreams?" And she says, "What you have to do is walk right down the street, keeping your eyes straight ahead, pretending you're on your way someplace a lot better. That's the way it turns out too. Wherever you land is sure to be better than the place you left." 2 seconds, I'm going to adjust this mic. Or we'll just leave this. Okay. So, Donna moved to Shelby, Ohio to live with her aunt, Orpha May, her mother's sister, and really the polar opposite of Sarah. I mean, this woman was an angel the more you read about her. After graduating high school in 1914, she's right here, it's her at a beach, I don't know what beach, but it's a great, you notice a lot of pictures from early 20th century, people don't smile a lot back then, so it's kind of telling of her personality, which I think is great. She enrolled in 1914, she enrolled in Lake Erie College. It's a library, they have extra books. Perfect, thank you. Awesome, thanks. She enrolled in Lake Erie College, where she joined a literary society and took up playwriting, and put on one of her first works, which is titled I Am Looking for a Lady, which she not only wrote, directed, and appeared in, she also created a newspaper parody called She, and became a contributor, literary editor, and then finally editor-in-chief of the Lake Erie Record. Powell really relished the change of scenery from Shelby, and she really just loved the whole scene of college. It was like leaving a small town to end, in sort of more liberal atmosphere of college would be great. And one of her, she wrote a canvas paper there saying, this is another quote from her, I arrived late at Lake Erie College in September of 1914 with the delirious sensation of having been shot from a cannon into a strange, wonderful planet. The world of girls seemed mysterious and infinitely fascinating after my own town full of factory men. It is a rich, illuminating experience to discover 1,000 different ways girls can be girls and still be nothing like yourself. There were girls who cried from homesickness for a hometown 12 miles away. There were girls who sat up after hours fiercely arguing about the prophet Moses, girls who borrowed each other's houseman or Leacock or Shaw to take on hikes, girls who fitted each other out for fine parties with sublime selflessness, a girl who wrote poetry brooding over her childhood memories of the bayous, a beaming, happy girl who loved Bach and played the pipe organ in chapel. So one of her classmates was interviewed years later, and she basically described Dawn as 5 feet tall, brown hair, and always saying something funny, clever, or sarcastic. Everybody knew she was, for lack of a better word, on the wrong side of the tracks, since most of the people at Lake Erie College had a little bit more privileged background, but despite that, everybody still loved her. So now, in the 20s. That's not Dawn. That is just Flapper and hijinks, which I think is, you can never get sick of pictures of Flappers doing crazy stuff, right? So this is how she describes her. Won't you read that, or read it too? This is how she described her first. I'm sorry.
It's hard to read it.
Is it? Okay, so I'll read it. So this is a description of first coming to New York. There really is one city for everyone. This is how she described New York as an afterthought. There really is one city for everyone, just as there is one major love. New York is my city because I have an investment I can always draw on. A bottomless investment of 21 years. I count the day I was born, building up an idea of New York. So no matter what happens here, I have a rock in my dreams, and there's nothing that can destroy it. So she moved to New York City in late summer of 1918, just fleeing small-town constraints of the Midwest, which she relished in. And just about a week before she left, she wrote her aunt, Orpha May, just describing her itch to get out of Ohio. She said, I love this farm, but there comes a time when the sight of a flock of jerseys grazing on a patch of poison ivy fails to thrill, and one yearns to go someplace where the band plays all the time and life is not so simple. God knows the thought of 5 feet of me struggling along in the heart of the wicked city gives me an empty sensation around the lung and just below the stomach. 'Tis written that I go to New York, so why try to fool with the gods? Anyway, it sort of describes some people's reaction to going to New York for the first time. Maybe not so grandiose, but for me it was like that. So she didn't immediately move to Greenwich Village. So she first moved to the Upper West Side at 353 West 85th Street, and she lived in a boarding house for women. There she hung out with a lot of artistic crowd, and sort of atmosphere was going on. There was, players, Broadway players, dancers, and artists and writers. They made up the majority of that residence. So her time on there would serve as the inspiration for one of her plays, Walking Down Broadway. I think I forgot to mention when I first started here that she, which I'll get back to at the end there, she wrote plays as well as short stories and novels, and actually acted in a film, a silent film, as an extra, but I'll get to that in a minute. 3 months later, she would already be singing the high praises of the life in the city when she wrote to one of her friends. And she says, "Do you know I've lived about 20 years since September 2nd, the date of my arrival in New York. Everything rolls around you all the time, and you grab what you want and then let it revolve again. It makes me dizzy to think of all the warm friendships and passionate affairs I've been through in 3 months. The funny part of all is you have to come to New York to appreciate the virtues of a small town, just as you have to go to college to learn how easily you can do without a BA. And all the men say, 'I love you,' and look at you with that long, wistful, 'I surely am hit now' gaze, and you kiss them and say, 'This is the first time I ever cared this like this,' then you never see each other again. And on the subway in the mornings, you suddenly find yourself talking to a man or girl who's genuine soulmate. They get out at Times Square, and you see them looking back at you through the windows, and both of you know you'll never meet again. Somehow there's nothing tragic in it, though. You recognize and love it all as life. The world, humanity, whatever it is." In 1919, she paid the bills by doing freelance writing in New York City publishing and advertising role, as well as being, as I mentioned, extra in silent film. The name of that film is called Footlights and Shadows, and it was shot in Fort Lee, New Jersey, which Universal Studios had a studio there before everything gravitated towards Hollywood. And unfortunately, there is no print of that exists, so I tried searching for it and can't find it, but just use our imagination. In 1920, she married Joseph Boucher, who she met earlier that year during that brief stint in publicity and the advertising work she was doing. And like Don, he too had dreams of becoming a successful writer, but unlike her, he would give up that goal and instead earn his success at advertising, a traditional advertising man, with 3 martini lunches and all that business. Theirs would be a long, tumultuous, but loving marriage that would last until his death in 1962. In August of 1921, their son, Joseph Jr., was born, displaying all the characteristics of autism at a time when it was offensively misdiagnosed. And that really almost caused a lot of the problems. The doctors would just use these, awful terms that were sort of ignorant from back then. In 1924, her, along with Joe and Joe Jr., moved to 46 West 9th Street, right around here. And a year later, her first novel, Wither, was published. But usually someone's writer's first novel, they're going to be really pumped about it, very excited and ecstatic. But any celebration was quickly short-lived as she almost immediately completely disavowed it. She writes in her 1943 diary entry, "Reading Wither, I was completely horrified at how completely hopeless and devoid of promise it was. Far worse than what I had written at 13. So, that's pretty rough. While her descriptions of the village life can be found throughout her novels, it's her first impressions of the scene 6 years earlier that I find amusing and oddly timeless to the next neighborhood that we always hear about in media today. So this is what she says about what it is like, what her impressions are of Greenwich Village. She says, "There are 3 stages you go through in regard to the village. First and foremost, oh, so this is Bohemia. My dear, don't you just love it all? Everything's so absolutely spontaneous. Don't you know Bohemia? Oh, thrills. Stage number 2. You begin to realize that all the boys and girls from back home think Bohemia is great, so you begin to see it with jaded eyes. Everyone tries to be a freak, wants to be noticed. Is everything for effect, and down in his heart is worse than ordinary. Is in fact a 10-cent rube like yourself. Bah. Village theatricals. Bah, bah, bah. Stage number 3. You combine and condense and mire and sift. And after all, the village is the village when all is said and done. You can almost transfer that to anything like this. It's different neighborhoods. In 1928, saw the publication of her novel, She Walks in Beauty, which is a story of, would soon join as one of the Ohio novels, trio of novels, and focusing on 2 sisters, Linda and Dory. One is cold and beautiful, and the other less attractive and intelligent and inspiring writer. Around this time, the family was now living in West Village at 106 Perry Street, and this is a picture of Barrow and Hudson Street around that same time in the 20s, so I thought that was kind of nice. You know, as I'm sure we all know, it's hard to imagine today, but the West Village at that time was one of the poorer areas in New York City. An attribute that endeared Dawn even more. And in a letter to her cousin, she says, "Every place else but New York you have to hide all your low beginnings and pretend everybody in family is white and can read and write and play the harp. What I mean, friend, is that you can be yourself here, and it's the only place where being genuine will absolutely get you. Anywhere you want. If it's you, as it does me, to live in the toughest quarter of downtown, semi-slums, because the houses are old and quaint and have little courts in back, and push carts and hurdy-gurdies go by your window with fruit and vegetables and straw hats and geraniums, well, that doesn't prevent you from being asked to Park Avenue. Penthouses or any place. The very best people think to be able to do as you damn please, not caring what anyone thinks, is the mark of aristocracy." That sounds like an old village in Edmond. Yeah. In 1931, the family moved back close to the epicenter of Village Bohemia to 9 East 10th Street. And I think someone here lives at 9 East 10th Street, am I right? Oh, fantastic. Which is around the corner from the Hotel Brevoort, which was located on 8th Street and 5th Avenue. Powell described the building, her house on 9 East 10th, as calm, spacious, one soul breathes deep, breathes it in it, and feels at rest. The Cafe Brevoort, you see here, is located in an already old establishment, would be Don's restaurant and bar of choice for much of the 1930s. She would have had stellar company. Other notable customers like Edmund St. Vincent Millay was there, DeJohn Barnes, and Isidore Duncan also hung out there. And I'm not sure necessarily at the same time, but probably around those years. And ironically, she would live within blocks of East 10th for the next 30 years. So she was always, as Ted said, we were just always around the next few blocks. So she really just kept her heart in the village. She described the cafe in her 1936 novel, Turn Magic Wheel. In it she says, she describes the characters we're setting here. In the Brevoort Cafe, they found their favorite corner table, or rather Dennis's favorite table, for if he sat there, he could watch all the mirrors from Corinne, and if someday she would come in the next room with another man, that actor for instance, he would watch them from here, and the next day, and when he asked her where she had tea, and she answered, "Oh, I was at Olive's," he would say, "Liar, I saw you at the Brevoort with that man." So, just to jump up years in a bit, Powell made a list of her favorite books in 1953, Diary of Entry, which you see right there, obviously transcribed, and I could read it if it's trouble hard seeing this. Some of her favorite novels were Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser, Dodsworth by Sinclair Lewis, Sentimental Education by Gustave Flaubert, Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol, Lost Illusions and a Distinguished Provincial by Henri de Balzac, and Our Mutual Friend and David Copperfield by Dickens. Now, to me, the selections indicate a vibe of pessimism with a dash of wit and sophisticated relationships. And this is the attitude that was no doubt influenced by Powell's life at this point, which included dealing with her husband's growing alcoholism and her son's emotional breakdowns, and subsequently the consistent misdiagnosis by the physicians. Despite this, she took pleasures where she could find them. Tim Page again says in his biography, "For Powell, the bad news was already in. Life was absurd, bloody, and brutal business. Always had been, always would be. There would be compensations along the way, and a wise person would grab as many of them as possible without complaining. In 1942 was yet another move, but merely just around the corner, literally just probably a few steps it seemed like, to 5 East 9th Street, where she would live the longest, running about 16 years. Here, she would frequent one of her favorite places, the Hotel Lafayette, which is right there. There she had her favorite corner seat where one could see the comings and goings of friends and acquaintances, including her literary friends and artists. Journalist and historian Matthew Josephson described the Lafayette as such. He said the cafe was wide, high-ceilinged room with tall windows giving on a street. It had mirrored walls, green-shaded lamps, and marble-topped tables, some of them reserved for players at dominoes and chess. In a corner, there used to be a rack filled with French magazines and newspapers. The Lafayette was rather ill-served by aged and surly waiters who were not French, but usually Swiss or Belgian. In her 1954 novel, The Wicked Pavilion, Powell disguised the Lafayette as Cafe Julian, saying Julian waiters were forthright, self-respecting individuals who felt their first duty was to protect the cafe from customers, their second to keep customers and employers in their proper places. The times of those artists at the Lafayette influenced a great deal of the plot, which centered on 2 mediocre painters who were suddenly sought after because of their relationship with a much bigger artist now deceased. I don't want to give away the whole plot of this, so if you guys should read all these. So by the time Lafayette was near demolition in the early 50s, she was already starting to frequent the Cedar Bar near 8th and University Place, the first location, and we all know that they moved up the street. That closed about 8 years ago, either 7 or 8 years ago. And much of that, similar clientele, but there was another growing artist group coming there, as you know, as the abstract expressionists. So, just to touch on Powell's love, she obviously loved Greenwich Village, but she loved New York City. So it's really exemplified exquisitely in the description of characters in Wicked Pavilion, their first walk through Midtown, which I think we all can relate to, more or less. So this is how it goes. It was the first time he'd ever been in New York, the city of his dreams, the first time he'd worn his officer's uniform, the first time he'd been drunk on champagne. New York loved him as it loved no other young man, and he embraced the city impulsively, discarding everything. He had hitherto cherished of his Michigan boyhood loyalties. In Radio City Gardens, he looked up at the colossal Prometheus, commanding the city's very heart and thought. Me! Exclamation point. He, the buddies, and hometown friends supervising his departure and strolled happily down Fifth Avenue, finding all faces beautiful and wondrously kind. The lacy fragility of city trees incomparably superior to his huge native forests. Under the giant diesel hum of street and harbor traffic, he caught the sweet music of danger, the voices of deathless love and magic adventure. Midtown isn't that bad, right? Or maybe it is. As the 1950s rolled on, the end of not only Lafayette, but the Hotel Greenwich was completely drawing Powell full-time to his successor of sorts, the Cedar Bar. The place was quickly becoming the epicenter, as I mentioned, the abstract expressionists, not to mention all the writers, beat writers, and everybody else that was sort of in that ground zero bohemia in the 50s. And new village bohemia that followed them, both the legitimate ones and the posers that were the hangers-on, as they call them. Powell was right there at the center of it all, taking the atmosphere in and mingling with the likes of Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, and Franz Klein, who, incidentally, is from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Anyone know that? I don't know. I'm just plugging my hometown. She became very friends with Klein, actually. So in the lower picture here, you see Grace Hardigan and Franz Klein just chatting with his friend there, and the beautiful Cedar Bar. The Cedar would be the prime influence for her final novel, The Golden Spur, and it was published in 1962. In it, the protagonist, Jonathan Jameson, travels from a small town in Ohio to search for his real father, who he believes his late mother met in village years before, his identity a mystery. In that search, he meets a wide variety of village characters and some familiar locales. While the Spur was a fictional bar based on a Cedar, some of those places mentioned in the novel were Chumley's, San Remo Cafe, Luchow's, and Jack Delaney's Steakhouse, and Cherry Lane Theater. Out of all those, possibly two, Cherry Lane Theater and Chumley's remain. I still have hope that Chumley's is going to reopen, even though it's going to be Chumley's 2.0. But let's hope, right?
Yes.
If anybody knows about that, let me know. So I'm just going to read an excerpt from The Golden Spur. So this is when Jonathan Jameson first walks into the bar. The long bars stretched before him back to dark stalls with dim, stable lanterns perched on their newel posts. Framed photographs of great horses, of old covered and wainscoted walls, horseshoes and gold spurs hung above the bar itself, photographed clippings of old racing forms. Jonathan examined his souvenirs, noting that all was left of the sporting past were the bowling alley ads posted on a bulletin board. These were overshadowed by notices of summer art shows, off-Broadway entertainments, jazz concerts, night courses in method acting, sketching, folk singing, hootenannies, poetry readings, ballet, and language groups. Penciled scraps of paper were scotch-taped to the wall, advertising cars, scooters, beach shack, blocks, or furniture for trade for sale. Homesick Californian with driver's license asked for a free trip back to North Beach. A new espresso cafe on Bleecker Street wanted a man to get up a mimeographed village news sheet in return for nominal pay, free cakes and coffee. Sunday Painter offered free dental service in exchange for model. An unemployed illustrator would teach the cha-cha or even a Charleston for her dinners. He took a stool at the bar. Near him, a man with skimpy gray goatee and plaid shirt and scout-type array was reading a copy of Encounter, the beer in hand. He had a mountain of pennies stacked in front of him, and now he raised his glass for the refill. The bartender silently counted off 15 coppers, conscious of Jonathan's interest in his little game. The man looked up from his magazine and stared at Jonathan frowning. "Excuse me," he said. "You remind me of somebody." "I do?" Jonathan asked, well pleased to look like somebody. The man studied him, frowning, then shook his head. "I can't place it." "My name's Jameson," Jonathan offered. "Don't know any Jameson," said the man. "You look like a real villager," Jonathan thought. Deep admiration. Ageless, jaunty, wearing his faded bohemian uniform with the calm assurance of the true belonger. "I must scrap this tourist outfit of mine and get one like this," Jonathan thought. He was somewhere between 30 and 60, bags under the eyes, deep furrows between tangled brows may testify of dissipation instead of years. His sharp-cut, sardonic face was otherwise unlined, the figure trend. So, of course the description of the bar is different, but it's pretty much from accounts, obviously, how the clientele at the Cedar Bar was. And Don was quickly spending a lot of her time there, pretty much in the late 50s and early 60s. And also it's really indicative of how she was now, from her days in the 30s and 40s, now involved in this whole beat artist scene in the Cedar that she quite frankly wasn't a fan of, but still just mingled and took in the whole atmosphere. Primary source from Tim Page's biography describes the decor as very undistinguished. He describes it as poor marble top tables all over the place. Dawn joined all the other artists' rides there every night. Talk politics with one of her favorite customers there. Was this taxi driver would always come in after his shift was over around midnight, and they'd sit there and talk for hours. Her favorite customer. Golden Spur is in a way a summation of Powell's work. Familiar topics like Ohio, New York, dive bars and elegant cafes, eccentric characters, artists and their hangers-on, and most of the small town or lack of experience in gaining it is big in the city. So all those themes kind of sort of come into focus in her novel. So that's you can't see that. So somebody interviewed her at the Villager towards the end of her life in 1964, 65, and they asked her what keeps her here at Greenwich Village. And I just really love this quote. And she said, "I am at home here. I can go out in the village anytime and find someone who speaks my language." It's short and simple, kind of says it all. In 1958, Don and Joe moved out to their home on East 9th Street due to the building being converted into co-ops. And those who declined to buy were forced to leave. So now they were also back to life as a couple, since their son Joe Jr. had now been institutionalized almost full time, and he would come home for periods, but he was away mostly at institution. And for a short time, they were bouncing around from residential hotel to another until they finally found another place at 43 Fifth Avenue in the early 1960s. In 1963, Powell moved to a penthouse at 95 Christopher Street, again right around the corner, but this time alone. So Joe Sr. had died a year before. And kind of horrible bad endings. So she herself would die in 1965. And she donated her, I'm not sure if you know this, but she donated her body to science, and she ended up a hospital, I forget what hospital it was, ended up burying her remains in Potter's Field. So that's where she's buried, which is pretty tragic. So, at the time of her death, her books were virtually out of print, and unlike writers like Fitzgerald and others who had fame at one point and lost it, and after they died, they would gain some recognition again. She just never had it. She came so close to having it during her lifetime. But it was until the mid-'80s when her friend Gore Vidal wrote Don Powell, the American writer, and that sort of spurred a new resurgence in the work, and a lot of her books started being published again. So that's actually the end of my presentation, but I welcome, and there's an autograph, a signature, which I think is nice. I welcome any questions, comments, thoughts.